Hi everyone, and welcome to Get to Know. My name is Tony Effick, and I'm co-founder of Black and Brilliant. And this is the next in the episode of Get to Know. And today, I'd love for you guys to get to know two people who I've come to know and love very much, which is Uyanda Manana and Kevin Power, managing directors of Conversation Lab in South Africa. So, Kevin and Uyanda, I'd like to say welcome. And how are you both doing?
Great, thank you, Tony. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Tony.
That's great. Thank you for joining us. Well, first of all, let me ask you both this question, and Uyanda, I'm going to ask you to answer first. For those who don't know Conversation Lab, can you tell us a little bit about it and your role in the company?
So, Conversation Lab, we like to think of ourselves as born digital. So our bedrock is around the digital space within advertising, and this allows us to hold ourselves to account. So we manage everything from strategic planning, creative development, all the way through to SEO, UX, and development, which I've always found quite unique. You know, I come from a very traditional agency background. And I think what sets us apart as Conversation Lab is we'll have an art director sat next to a back-end technical developer working together on a campaign. Seeking the best results for those campaigns. So that's the area in which we play in as an agency. And my particular role is I was recently appointed as managing director of our South African branch. And my appointment was August last year. And since then, my focus has been in sort of bedding in our new structure. And as you know, I mean, massive change like this, you know, new leadership and new ownership of the company can be quite unsettling. So it's about really taking my team along the journey of this transforming our brand as well. So defining who we are and how we show up within the industry has been primarily my focus at the moment.
That's great. Kevin, can you chip in there as well and give us your view of kind of your definition of the company?
Yeah, sure, Tony. Yeah, I suppose in a simple sense, we're a full-service digital agency. And as Uyanda has said, we do everything from brand. We like to think we can move the needle on brand comms and brand strategy, but very much we get excited about where the rubber hits the road and on it actually delivering results and delivering results in market for our clients. So we're looking for sort of brand outcomes in the market. I now actually live in the UK, and it was a great honor to set up the agency and get it to the point where it got to. We grew to about 70 people in 5 years. And now I've handed over the reins to Uyanda. So Uyanda and I have worked together for 2 years, and it was a privilege and an honor to be able to give that role of the MD in South Africa to Uyanda and to watch her to grow into it and to take our agency another step further as we look for growth.
Interesting. I think one of the things you said, you're in the UK now, and the three of us have an unusual intersection because although it might on the surface appear that you guys come from very different backgrounds, your lives have intersected globally over the years, including intersected with mine because we all at one point worked in the same building. I'd love you to share some of that common thread you have with each other and with us, you know, and what how you see the global marketplace.
Yeah, sure. Tony, if I take that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's very fair to say Uyanda and I were born into totally different livelihoods in apartheid South Africa. So Uyanda's a little bit younger than me, but we were both born into a time that was very different to it is now. I, as a white South African and as a white male South African, had massive opportunities. So I had access to the best schools, I had access to the best universities, and I had, access to bigger networks and more influential networks. Being a white South African and having that whole government system was just geared to supporting white South Africans. So also for me, a rite of passage was to go to London. It was quite common for the white population to get on a plane and explore London and travel. Uyanda will touch on her story, but very different. I see Uyanda as a bit of a trailblazer to be coming into London in the early 2000s. apartheid South Africa only ended in 1995, and there's still huge disparities in opportunity between, and there is still today, sadly, between black and white. But yeah, we ended up, Tony, I met you, a massive respect for you. You've had a big influence on Conversation Lab and my career and the business. And fascinating that we all worked at Publicis at the same time. You and I obviously, built a relationship, but we didn't discover Uyanda. And she's no wilting violet, so surprising so. But Uyanda, do you want to touch on your journey there? Was a lot more interesting and exciting than mine, I would suppose.
Look, let me start by saying, thank you for seeing me as a trailblazer. But, like when I was young, I remember I have this like deep belief that one day, somehow, I would make it overseas. And what's interesting is overseas in my mind was defined by the United States, and I think for a lot of black kids that I grew up with, and it was influenced largely by, watching The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, the Jeffersons, The Cosby Show. And it set up this like idyllic view of overseas and America, in that, you had successful black and affluent black families in this show. And it made it seem like, there was so much freedom and opportunity in the US. So ever since then, I was determined that somehow I would go overseas. So my first opportunity came about in my final year of high school, where I had the opportunity to apply to be an exchange student. And I didn't know how I would pay for it. Didn't know, how I was going to get there, but I thought, let me just apply and see what happens. And I got in, which was amazing. I got into the program. And then I had to tell my mom, who knew nothing about me applying for this exchange program. And as you can imagine, she was like, well, I don't know how you're going to get there. We don't have the money to do that. So I went back to the exchange program organizers and said, look, thank you. I'm very honored, but, I can't go any further really. And that was that, or at least I thought so. And they came back and said, look, we found a sponsor for you to go to Zurich in Switzerland. Which I was like, well, Zurich wasn't really my first choice, but hey, let me go. Packed my bag with what I thought were warm clothes. Got to Zurich, and I'll never forget walking out of that airport, and that ice cold, that cut through the bone. And I don't think I've ever been as cold since, I have to tell you. But it was an exceptional year. I got exposed to cultures and languages that I'd never come across. And that's where I think the travel bug bit me. I came back to South Africa sort of with this vision that, anything is possible if you just apply your mind, have a bit of faith and work hard, which I think is what drove me to then go to the UK. Which also wasn't that easy. I quit my job in South Africa, which was a great job. I worked for L'Oreal. I was a product manager there. So much to my mom's distress, I quit, packed a bag, and went to London without a job. And yeah, my first job was at Marks and Spencer's on the shop floor behind the teller. My mother would have.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And suffice to say, it was very humbling. But yeah, 2 months later, I dropped my CV off at Publicis. The receptionist took it from me. And yeah, 2 weeks later, I got a phone call for an interview. I think I went for like 3 rounds. Started off as a trainee. Then 8 years later, I was an account director on L'Oreal, Garnier, and some other accounts. So yeah, I think, yes, the opportunities were difficult for me to sort of take advantage of as a black girl in South Africa. But I was determined. I went into it thinking, expecting only the best to happen. And I think that's the start, and then the rest is up to fate.
That's an interesting perspective. Expecting only the best to happen. I think that's a real key in life.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you don't walk into situations. You don't walk into opportunity. So that's a really interesting perspective. I'd like to understand a little bit more about, because you talked a little bit earlier on about the agency, its genesis, your positioning, etc. I'd love to understand a little bit more for the global audience's benefit, about the marketplace, right now, the agency marketplace, in fact, the communications and media marketplace, full stop, and how you guys see that evolving over the next 5 years. So kind of, you've both been global. You've both kind of been architects of agencies and accounts. But this market is different from, we have a very global audience. Talk a little bit about the South African marketplace and how you see it evolving. Let's go to Kevin first, and then Uyanda will come back to you.
Okay. Yeah, Tony, I think we often look at different markets and we think they're quite disparate or not homogenous. And certainly they're not homogenous, and a South African market is quite different to the UK and to certainly an American one. But I think the changes and the shifts that have been happening for some time are also happening in South Africa. We just probably at a slightly different point on the curve. So definitely an insourcing is a big threat to us in agency life, or could be seen as a threat, where big corporate businesses like your Unilevers and your banks and your retailers are building capability in-house. Specifically around the automation space, where with the media buying and the media optimization, there's a move where some businesses feel they can run that themselves, and the tools and the software can do that. So that's a threat. The consultancies as well. I mean, back in our day in Publicis, we saw the threat of that, pre-2010 even. And we see Accenture now regarded as the biggest digital agency in the world. So that threat is there. I think where digital agencies are going, and where we're quite keen to go, is actually creating our own products and services. So trying to move away from a purely professional services business and build something that we can then own as a product and scale. But I think ultimately, clients are still looking for partners who can support them and help them navigate a world that's constantly changing, whether it's blockchain or artificial intelligence. So we're not too worried. We think if we keep our heads down and we do good work, there's still enough to go around. There might not be as much as there was in previous decades, but there's still enough to go around, and if we can bring the right talent to the table, we can still have great prosperous futures in the ad game or the agency life.
Kevin, you just talked about talent. I think talent's a really important thing. So Uyanda, I'd like to ask you about South Africa in general, and we're now starting to see the rise of more Black talent in your industry and others. Can you kind of comment on that a little bit? Is it happening at the pace you'd like to see it at? Is it happening? This is my observation. Where is it happening? What's the trend? Would love you to just comment on that if you could.
Yeah, the rise and support and acceleration of Black talent it's happening, but not quite at the pace that it should be. I think there is more opportunity for Black talented individuals within our industry. However, I think most agencies, particularly the network agencies, it does tend to become a tick box compliance, making sure the quotas are right as far as the labor legislations are concerned. My biggest concern with how transformation is handled at the moment is I don't feel there's enough diversity and inclusion within where we seek that talent from. Our industries, the feeder colleges into our industry are quite elite and incredibly expensive. So what you tend to find is it's generally Black middle class young people who have access into the industry, which means you essentially, and don't hear me wrong, have the same sort of person who's got similar backgrounds. And I think the key is to start at grassroots and see how we bring Black people from different walks of life and nurture the talent that comes out of there to truly transform our industry. Because another thing I'm finding is women are still not properly represented. And my view is the boys club, the old boys club, has now changed race and color, but it's still the boys club. So women are still not quite there in terms of transformation and being included and having a seat at the table.
Well, yeah, it seems to be a global issue. Kevin, it feels like in the leadership of your agencies, you seem to have kind of tackled that head on, because I think you have female leaders for most of the different units of your company. Can you talk a little bit about how that came to be and the genesis of that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was my business partner, John Olive, we two white men, we started the business. And we also felt, I mean, we try and put our money where our mouth is, and by no means have we got it right, and we still get it wrong, and the transformation hasn't happened quick enough, even within our own business. And we're accelerating that now with Uyanda, and Uyanda's got an open mandate to progress that change and put her stamp on it and her culture into the business. So what we did is we actually set up a separate agency. We thought, let's create a black agency where my business partner and I would be minority shareholders, and we're going to create the situation where we mentored a young youthful talent that was already within our business. We wanted to take some staff that were in our business. They'd help build Conversation Lab. We said, let's pay it forward. Let's give them shares in their own business, and we'll give the infrastructure and the mentorship and the funding. And it didn't actually work. I still think to this day it was a very innovative approach, but it didn't work because we bit off more than we could chew. We were still trying to build Conversation Lab, as were these young black staff members. And then we sort of said, let's build another agency. So it was flawed in that respect. We brought Uyanda in and as the MD of that agency. That was our first thought, and we thought, well, Uyanda can drive this and lead this. And we did that for about 6 to 9 months. Things still weren't moving as fast as we wanted, as the acceleration that we wanted and the change that we knew we needed. And luckily, we then saw in Uyanda that we had a real leader and a real talent in front, right in front of us. And we just looked at the situation and said, let's just bash this whole thing together, rebuild it, and start again with a new structure. So we folded that black agency into our main mothership agency, Conversation Lab. And we gave shareholding to Uyanda as a significant shareholder, and we've given shareholding to these 4 young black talents. So we think that's quite an innovative way. So even if we didn't put it all into Uyanda, let's say, and then you sort of you centralize that opportunity. So we've now the opportunity has been given to a wider audience and a more grassroots audience. And we think it's opportunity for more success because now we've got 7 shareholders that can make a difference. So that was the key thing from a black empowerment point of view, and a sharing of what we've got. And then the 3 women MDs is a very exciting space that we're in, where Uyanda's leading the mothership Conversation Lab, which is sort of the 50 staff engine, and then we've got Media Lab that has Bridget Danelli as the MD, and then we've got Power Lab, which has Megan Power as the MD. So we're in a very exciting space. Again, I really, by no means have we got the answers, and we're sitting here as if we cracked the solution. But I think it's exciting, the opportunities, and it just invigorated everyone in the business. And I think that change in leadership, seeing Uyanda take the helm, lead from the front and center, it's inspiring to quite a largely young agency of 50, 60 people. So yeah, we're very excited for the future, and it was the best from a business owner point of view. It was the best decision we could have made.
Love it. Yeah, you've proven yourself to be like a great leader, just all the way from the beginnings of your career and just your own personal story. I think it's a story everyone can look at and get inspired by. You talked about the grassroots. You talked about women in particular. So from your perspective as somebody who's actually gone through that journey, not grassroots necessarily, but somebody who went through a journey, and has ended up in a top position, what's your perspective on how we accelerate the rise of black talent in South Africa? What are the biggest challenges? So we've identified the problem. We've spoken before about this. We've all spoken before about this. So, we do want it to get better. There's not a Conversation Lab on every corner, thankfully. But what's your perspective? How do we make this better? How do we accelerate it?
Sure. So South Africa is slightly different to anywhere in the world, really, in that it's a melting pot of so many different cultures. Even within the black community, there are different tribes. It's just so diverse culturally. And so when you come into the agency environment and the leadership within that environment do not have a deep understanding of the various cultures within South Africa, it becomes quite limited in terms of the work we produce and the sort of talent we bring in, and not just bringing in, but understanding how we support and accept those different cultures. I think being able to be accepted in any environment for who you are and what you bring with you is the first step.
Yep.
And I think we've still got a long way to go in that regard, just purely because I think those open, honest conversations are not necessarily being had. A lot of sugarcoating happens, and on both sides. I think we easily, and I can speak for myself, I easily sometimes get offended without necessarily opening myself to conversation, you know, and that inclusion is a two-way street, right? I need to be included, but people like Kevin as well need to be able to express themselves or ask questions that they're not quite sure of without me getting offended, in order to actually have the conversations that need to be had in order to actually drive us forward. So those are the key areas. So acceptance and true inclusion being a two-way street.
That's really interesting, because I've had a similar kind of thought in my mind about that, because I talk about jobs or careers with fences around them. You can see the job, but you can't quite get to them sometimes. And sometimes those fences are not necessarily things that are, you know, physical or preventative in any meaningful way. They're just things sometimes in your head or in other people's heads. And I remember my early days in agency life, you know, you do have imposter syndrome. You do feel you can't be yourself, your authentic self, or you can't bring, or you can't engage in conversations in certain ways. I remember not too long ago during George Floyd, talking to people and feeling, even though I'd come to the senior level of my career, about things I could say, you know, at work, which I hadn't said before. And people were like, why didn't you say that before? I didn't know that thing. And I was like, well, we just don't talk about that kind of stuff. But the reality is that it is both sides. It is this idea that we should be both talking and inclusive, and recognizing there are going to be these people that you talked about coming from the grassroots who do have imposter syndrome, who do feel they're not included. And we need these conversations to be more free flowing. So I appreciate that commentary.
And what's interesting, is what I felt working in London and in the UK. And I mean, that environment could have been more different than where I come from. Talking tea. But it was where I felt most authentic, because I think I was expected to be different. You know, I didn't like, I'm South African, I'm Black, and that's who I am. And there wasn't sort of a box that I had to be put in. And the most liberating, I think, working experience I've ever had, is because there wasn't a template that people had assigned to me. It was Uyanda, who was South African and Black, but I was essentially myself throughout those 8 years.
Yeah, Kevin, can I ask you to comment on that, because I think you and I over the years have had some pretty open conversations, you know, usually over a drink. But over the years, can you talk a little bit about kind of like, because these are sensitive topics, yeah? So there are times where you think, yeah, I could say this, can't say that. But do you think over time now it's becoming more liberating and free, and you can say what you need to say? Do you think times have changed, or do you think in the culture right now there's still a lot of blocks between what you can and can't say? I mean, obviously there should always be some kind of blocks, but is it better now?
Yeah, I think it definitely is better now. I think, you know, but it's still fun. I still find it difficult, even myself, talking about Black staff or white staff. I mean, in some circles, we'll have that conversation and people say, you can't say that. Can't, you know, and it is a tightrope. I mean, I was even nervous coming onto this call just because, you know, what do you say? You know, you might say the wrong thing. And as Uyanda exactly said, I mean, I'll say to Uyanda, I think you handle this question, because I don't think I actually have permission to answer that. You know what I mean? So I think there'll always be those tensions and that sort of energy. But definitely I think it's a much better place we're in, where we can have these conversations. I think this initiative of Black and Brilliant it is one of those things. It's Black Lives Matter. Let's front up. Let's have that conversation, get that sorted, and then move to the next challenge. But so there is still a lot of that concern where we hide behind certain things. But I think now it's come to a head, and it's come to a head in the right way. And jointly we must find solutions.
Love it. And you guys have been on a tremendous journey. And then to close things out, I want to ask you both this question. So, Uyanda, I'm going to ask you first. And this is, so the 10-year-old you, 10 years old, turns up today and you have to give the 10-year-old you a piece of advice. So what would you say to the 10-year-old you, if the 10-year-old you turned up today? What advice would you give to them and why, if any?
So I would say to my 10-year-old self, you know what? You need to cut mom some slack. Very, very best she can. And honestly, when I look back to the child I was and what I put my mom through, I would say that to my 10-year-old now, because I am now a mother to a 7-year-old little girl who, if it's possible, more boisterous, more opinionated, more like a handful than I ever was. So I would say to my 10-year-old self, cut mom some slack. She's doing the best she can.
Wonderful. Mothers around the world, I think, would be very happy to hear that, including my wife. Kevin, what about you? 10-year-old you turned up.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm terrible at is reading. I read the newspaper and the sports section, but I've never been a one to sit and really just read information and just take it all in. And I think that's what it's one of the things I wish I was pushed to do more, is just read, and read different views and just get a very much rounded view of what's out there, and beware fake news. But yeah.
There's a lot of it out there. Well, I mean, this was wonderful, and we really appreciate you sharing what you're doing at Conversation Lab with our community, your backstories, your vision, and and having the courage to tackle some uncomfortable conversations in today's marketplace. And so I just want to say, if you didn't know Uyanda Manana and Kevin Power, now you know. And so thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you both.
Thank you, Tony. Great.
Thank you.